Hi, everybody. It's Dr. Laura Hanson with Connect My Brain. We are so excited to have you with us today because we have a very special guest. And I know we started this series on Nutrition 101, but what I've been telling you in each of these podcasts is that I want you to think about it as chemistry. So here at Connect My Brain, we have a 3-tier approach, mechanical, chemical, brain. Understanding chemistry is so important, but it has such a far-reaching effect on us. It's not just about the food you select at the grocery store. It's not just the supplements that you put in your mouth, but it's also the choices that you make when you're trying to take care of your health care. And so today I am so fortunate to have James Roguski with me, who is a researcher and author for a natural health proponent and an activist of getting old systems out and new systems in. But even more so, he is in this current event that is going on in our world that I'm just not sure all of us are aware of, that there's decisions being made on our behalf that you may not know this is actually happening, but you need to know. So without further ado, James, thanks so much for being with me today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, I appreciate the opportunity.
So with that,
there's so much to talk about. Just let me know where you want to start.
You just dive in, maybe give the audience a little bit of background of you, what got you involved in looking at the World Health Organization, what's going on, what's the impact, and what can we do?
Well, for the last 30 years or so, I've personally had a goal of just replacing the system that we've been shackled with. I do not believe that the system that we live with in terms of health is actually geared towards healing people. And I'll give people something to think about to just summarize that so we can move on. If you're working with a health practitioner who is financially rewarded when you are healthy, then you're working in a system where the incentives are proper. The system under which we operate, people are actually financially rewarded to do things to and for people when they're sick. So the longer people stay sick and the more that gets done, the more money transfers. It's a really simple concept, but I'll repeat it. Are you working with someone who's rewarded for a job that is successfully done? You come in feeling bad, you leave feeling better. They make more money than if you keep feeling ill and keep coming back. Okay? It's a very simple concept, but everybody seems to miss it. Now, that's, getting into the new, because that's the new system that we have. I had many websites dedicated to natural health and so forth. And about a year or so ago, a little bit more than a year ago, a good chunk of all of that was completely wiped off the internet because I must have been right over the target. I was, publishing some articles about things that were going on at the time. And so everything went away. My website hosting provider just wiped it all out. So I had a little bit of a personal reset, okay, a great reset for myself a year ago. And about a year ago, a little bit after that happened, I stumbled into a document, ended up going down the rabbit hole, and I've been there ever since, essentially becoming a self-educated expert on what the WHO, the World Health Organization, is involved in right now. Now, many people may have heard of the WHO, but what is going on right now is mostly going on in secret. It's a little bit public, so there's all kinds of confusion. They are currently negotiating along 2 separate tracks. Everybody gets them mixed up. There's 2 separate things going on to change international law. Now, a lot of times people think that doesn't impact you, what's going on internationally, but this really would. And so the 2 things, number one, are they talk about a new pandemic treaty. And I'm just going to put that up on the shelf and not really talk about that so much, because everybody in the news thinks that they're talking about that, but what they're actually doing is crossing up the information with the other thing that I really want to talk mostly about. And those are amendments to existing international health regulations. So what's going on in the media is that the details from both are all being merged together, and most people are just saying the treaty. This, that, and the other thing is in the treaty. Well, if people were to go and download the 32-page document that is what they call zero draft, it's before the first draft, okay? The first 12 pages are an absolutely sickeningly sweet propaganda that makes it all sound wonderful. And I'm here to tell you that even though it may seem like you're reading English, you're actually reading globalese. And so it's very difficult for people to work through that and realize that what they think it means isn't really what it means. Most people don't get to the second, 2/3 of the document to see all of the horror story. They glance at it and they come away with, an idea of what's going on. Now, my concern is the proposed amendments to existing international health regulations. Now, we've been a party to these international health regulations for decades. And the problem that even all of the experts on alternative media are just skipping is that the method by which these regulations are amended is very different than anything anybody is talking about or even thinking about. And I can give an example because they did it last year. They meet every May. It's called the World Health Assembly. This year it's going to be May 21st to the 30th. And 194 member nations send their delegates. Every nation gets one vote. So, China and India with 1.5 billion people, they get one vote. The United States gets one vote. Every other nation gets one vote. And what they did last year was they submitted, a group of nations submitted amendments to 5 articles of the regulations. And they literally went off in the back rooms and, they discussed what was going on. And when they got into the public assembly hall, and I have all of this video on an article that I published last year, they simply say, well, we're considering this document. Are there any objections? And they look around for about 10 seconds and boom, okay, good, it's adopted. Now, the rules for changing the regulations, that's all that's needed. There's no presidential signature. There's no Senate confirmation, advice and consent, or parliament or prime minister, wherever people might be. And anybody who wants to, argue about whether or not that's right or wrong, that's a wonderful theoretical argument. It just simply is. They did it last year. They could do it again this year. They're planning on doing it next year. And so the changes that have been proposed are extraordinary. And back in last May, they gave a directive to all of the 194 member nations that by September 30th of last year, if the nations wanted to submit any changes, they should do so by the 30th. A number of nations did. A couple of nations were a little bit tardy, but their information got included. And so all told, approximately 90 nations, many of them grouped together like the European Union or the nations in the Africa region, submitted 307 proposed amendments. Now, there's only about 58 pages in the current regulations, and there's a 51-page document of changes. So needless to say, there's some really substantial changes. And to just pick one of them, which is a combination of 2 amendments, Bangladesh proposed changing the definition of 2 terms, 2 words or phrases in the regulations, temporary and standing recommendations. Currently, those things are defined as non-binding advice. Dr. Laura, have you ever given anybody advice?
Yes, regularly.
Were they legally obligated to do what you said?
Well, no, not really.
I mean, that's what a
Not legally.
recommendation is, right? It's non-binding
Right.
advice. You can take it or leave it. Okay.
Right.
Well,
That's right. That's right.
Bangladesh proposed crossing out non-binding. Malaysia's
Mm,
proposal in Article 42 would change the wording so that temporary and standing recommendations shall be implemented as soon as possible. Well, even the International Health Regulations Review Committee, which was a panel of experts that put forth a big report in the middle of January, and it was made available in early February, said, well, that would really change the entire nature of the WHO. It would change it from an advisory body to a dictatorial, totalitarian, that would change recommendations to be orders. Now,
right.
anybody can look at these documents. All I've ever done for the last year is read through the evidence of what they're doing and just shine light on aspects of it because, there's thousands of words that nobody wants to read, but it's all right there for anybody to see. It's not a theory. Okay. Arguably, it's a conspiracy because people are working together. But what they're doing is each nation is trying to put forth, whatever changes they wanted and trying to get the WHO to do this, that they feel would benefit their nation. Other nations want to do this. Other nations want to do that. And a lot of the nations are deciding that they want to give up some of their sovereignty to empower the WHO. They somehow feel that is, a wise move on their part. But what the net result would be is that if these are adopted by a simple majority, all nations would be obligated. Now, if you think about any type of legislature, okay, if a law is passed, 51% to 49%, it applies to everybody. And so if a simple majority of all of the nations in the world decide that they want to give sovereign control over to the WHO, it sucks in the 49%. I'm just making up that number. But if a majority,
right.
Pass these changes, those changes apply to everybody else. And so there's a lot of discussion in the alternative media about a proposed treaty. I'm not talking about the proposed treaty. Any discussion about constitutionality or whether or not the Senate is going to be involved or the president could just sign it, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the other track where they're quietly meeting. They met all last week in Geneva. They were supposed to have 5 days of meetings where they had a morning session and an afternoon session. So 10 total, sessions of all these meetings. They only recorded 4 of them, and 6 of them were totally in secret. Now they're meeting this week as well about the treaty, and it's pretty much the same thing. They had a couple of meetings that were recorded and are public, but they're currently meeting in secret now to discuss that. And so for the last number of months, even more than a year now, they've been accepting proposals, and they have a 0 draft for the treaty, and they have a working draft for the amendments. And what's possibly happening in secret this week is they're making the decision, okay, we've got enough proposals. They got 307 amendments, right, that have been proposed. That's plenty, let me tell you. And they're deciding, okay, are we now at a point, meaning the WHO, are they now at a point that they can transition from collecting ideas to actually negotiating? And once they go into negotiating mode, it's just going to be completely secret. They're not going to say anything. Okay. And so step number 1 is the problem that, well, where's the public input? Where's the public comment? They are not talking about health. And here's where it's really confusing. The international health regulations are not really about health. Now, that sounds absurd, but that's the world we live in these days. If you actually read them, they really should be called the International Surveillance, Monitoring, Reporting, emergency declaring, fear-mongering control regulations, because that's really what they're all about. Now, currently, they're not horrific. There are certain aspects of it that, I think do need to be changed. But essentially, the requirements that are legally binding now and have been for the past couple of decades are nations are obligated to tell the international community through the WHO if there's some kind of an outbreak or if there were some chemical spill. They really should have declared a public health emergency of international concern after that train wreck and subsequent fire in Ohio, because some of the pollution, I understand, crossed the Canadian border. So we had a problem. We had an emergency that really was of international concern, and they completely failed to do their job, right? So, alerting your international neighbors, whether it's through a contagious disease that maybe people would get on an airplane and transfer, or contaminated food, that's being sold and shipped around the world. If you notice that there's a problem, this is a system of surveilling those types of issues and letting everybody know. Well, what it appears they have found is that the way these legally binding regulations can be changed has opened up the opportunity for them to give themselves all kinds of power. And if the 194 delegates who are unelected, unaccountable to anybody, and quite frankly, unknown, people do not know who it is that is representing them and speaking for them. If they just get together in May and decide amongst themselves to change the rules, they could shift the entire system of sovereignty from nation to nation and freedom, for individual people over to the WHO, because that's the method by which these regulations are changed. Now, there's three more that I want to talk about. They want to change the ability of the Director General to declare an emergency, not based on any data or statistics or evidence, just if he determines that there is the potential for an emergency. Well, my goodness, that could be anything. Okay. The most outlandish change, when I first read the international health regulations about a year ago, I got to Article 3, Section 1, which are the core principles of the international health regulations. And what that currently says is that they must be implemented with full respect for the dignity, human rights, and fundamental freedoms of people. And I said, well, that sounds good. I'm okay with that. India has proposed crossing that out. It's astonishing. Respect for dignity, human rights, and fundamental freedoms, just cross it right out. Now, ultimately, there's a lot of craziness in some of these proposals. They want to do a lot of things. And in negotiations, a lot of times, you put some stuff in there that you're willing to give away so that you end up with what you really, really want. And my opinion of what it is they really, really want was mostly proposed by the nations of the European Union. They want a global digital health certificate. It goes by many names. People call it a vaccine passport, digital ID. They want to have a prophylaxis certificate, a vaccine certificate, a testing certificate, a recovery certificate, none of which are defined, right? They, again, could be anything.
Right.
They want to have a traveler locator form so that they can track and trace you and whoever you come into contact with. And they want it all to be connected to a QR code that could either be digital on your phone or just be printed on a piece of paper or an ID card or something to access everybody's medical records, which would then open it up to, having it be, well, you didn't do what they demanded you to do to your body. And so now you're not able to access and live your life. And so that's the thing I'm most concerned about. And everything, all 307 are concerning. But I think, if they were to have to pick and choose what it is they want, that's the thing that many people are talking about, That is not found anywhere in the treaty. So when people in the alternative media are saying all of the stuff that I just said, but then they say, the unfortunate word treaty, when you go look at the treaty, you're not going to see the things I just talked about because they're in the proposed amendments to the regulations.
Gotcha.
So the fact checkers are having a grand old time pointing out that what people are saying actually is incorrect. It's inaccurate. They're mixing these two things together, fear-mongering about one and ignoring the other.
Okay. Well, I'm so glad that you touched on that part because, the last few years have been very, very difficult. There's been loss of lives. There's been loss of business spirit. I primarily work with children, the impact on kids, cognitive abilities, social abilities, and to hear that there's an organization that can simply just kind of a group of people, like you said, that we don't even know who they are making these decisions for us. And please correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like that they could literally just decide that there's an emergency, even if there isn't one, and we could be very easily funneled right down that same type of path that we've been in for the last 3 years.
With a very important difference. So everything you said, yes, but with a very important difference. From the beginning in the 1940s until current day, the WHO, according to Article 23 of the WHO Constitution, can make recommendations. So everything that has happened over the last 3 years, it was not the case that the WHO, had some kind of legally binding authority and said, you must do this because we said so. That's what they're trying to implement, right? So if you think the past 3 years were bad, they were based on non-binding advice. If you change that non-binding advice to legally binding, you shall do what the WHO says. I can't even begin to imagine how much worse that is. Okay. And I'm not going to, because I'm not going to manifest that. That is not going to happen. Okay. And so step number one is actually really easy. Get as informed as anyone cares to be. Anyone can go to stoptheglobalagenda.com. I think I've done a decent job of explaining all of, the different details between these two different proposals. Stoptheglobalagenda.com. There are 10 things that people can do.
Oh, great.
Many, many different ways, and there are many, many more. Okay. But ultimately, what we're dealing with is this is a group of people who have identified that the structure under which the WHO operates would enable them to enact changes that would give them unlimited power. And you don't generally want to negotiate with an abuser or a terrorist. That seems to be the wrong move. And so Representative Andy Biggs from the 5th District in Arizona, last Congress and now in this Congress, proposed H.R. 79, which is to exit the WHO. Their rules do not apply if we're not a member, as with any other group that you might be a member of. And so anyone can go to exitthewho.com, and we've been gaining supporters for that legislation. It's actually so short, you could read it in under 2 minutes. It only has 3 things. It would repeal the joint resolution from 1948 that got us involved in the first place. It would stop giving the WHO money, and it would give them a 1-year notice that we're out of here. And it's that simple. Okay. And so stoptheglobalagenda.com and exitthewho.com. And I do something that everybody thinks is crazy, but I've met wonderful people such as yourself because I do it. My phone number is 310-619-3055. And I do a daily Zoom meeting twice a day at noon and 7 p.m. Pacific, which would be 3 p.m. and 10 p.m. Eastern. But people from all over the world are welcome to just, figure out what time that is wherever they live. And I do everything I can to get people clear on what the facts are, because everybody's got it all jumbled up. They're talking about the treaty. There's a lot of not really good stuff in the treaty, but the proposed amendments could happen like that. I mean, they bring it up in the middle of their assembly. They say, are there any objections? And if nobody speaks up, it's done.
That's it. Well, the reason I wanted to bring you on, I listened to you on another podcast the other day, and yes, you gave your number, and I just reached out because I too really believe in bringing truth to people about health and about the impact of different things and where it can lead us, just like what we've been talking about with the WHO. And we as a community, as a body of people, we have to understand what's going on. And I get it. Sometimes things just feel very overwhelming, but this is where you have resources. So like you coming on the podcast today, that is incredible. And we will share the links that you gave us and your number. Hopefully you won't get too bombarded, but
hopefully a lot of concerned people will reach out and call me. And I'm actually very optimistic. I'm actually very optimistic because I have yet to run into any person that I've actually communicated with who says, "Oh no, Jim, you're wrong. This is a great idea. We really want Tedros Ghebreyesus to be the dictator of the world and tell everybody what to do. That sounds fantastic." Okay. I don't expect that to happen ever. Okay. Right. Now the people who, one of the proposals is that there be a new multi-billion-dollar fund and that it be directed by the WHO. And it literally says that the details will come 24 months after it's been adopted. And so the people who might be on the receiving end of those many tens of billions of dollars, they're probably all for this. I don't happen to be one of those people, okay? And I don't know anybody who's one of those people, but I can see why people are pushing for it because they're trying to essentially change the rules in a way that leads to what I would call, crony capitalism, organized crime, money laundering, just an abomination of the way anything even remotely called government should operate. To have all this money go into a pile to be controlled by unelected, unaccountable, unknown people, to go to whomever knows how to gain access, to that money, that's corrupt as corrupt can be. And so the average person in the world can comprehend that this is just absurd. And so one of the other projects that I'm working on, and I did this in September, basically a call out to people to get your phone. I'm using my laptop. Most people have a camera on their laptop. Record whatever it is you want to say and put it out there in the universe, because your silence is viewed as consent. And so I have another project that's coming, and I'm taking people's videos, silenceequalsconsent.com, all spelled out, silenceequalsconsent.com. Everybody can be the media. You have your podcast, other people have whatever they do on various video platforms or audio, whatever it might be. By all means, everybody, say whatever it is you want to say, put it out there onto whatever platform you want. Let me know that you've done it, and I'll try to spread the word of what you said, because the WHO is not accepting any public input. They have their quote unquote relevant stakeholder. Not at this point. They haven't done a darn thing. And so they allow their relevant stakeholders literally a seat at the table. They had a meeting, it was all dedicated to all of the foundations, like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the Rockefeller Organization and so forth. They are allowed to speak, but we, the people, are not given a voice at all. So take the link to what you're listening to right now, this podcast, and share it with absolutely everybody you possibly can. Make your own,
Yes,
you know,
please.
whether it's audio, video, whatever it may be. Learn as much as you can. Go to stoptheglobalagenda.com and get straight on the facts. But speak your mind. Say what you want to say and put it
All
out
right, so
into
it
the
was
universe. Silence equals consent.com. There's we've gotten a handful of submissions so far. It's a work in progress. And
well, I'll be putting something over there.
we got a couple of hundred. We got a couple of hundred last September, and those are all available on screwthewho.com. So if you go to screwthewho.com, you can see what people had to say back in September about the treaty. Now we're more talking about the amendments, but what we're really talking about is exiting the WHO. So exitthewho.com, stoptheglobalagenda.com, and silence equals consent.com. And I appreciate your time. And, you know, if there's any other questions that you have, but it's, you know, they're trying to do this primarily in secret. They, you know, it's not like we voted and told our delegate what we wanted. Nobody's asking the people. They're just making these decisions. And quite frankly, the worst part of all of it is they're really not talking about health. They're not talking about the things that they did wrong over the last 3 years. There's a litany of things. You know, I think everybody's aware of all of the craziness that happened these past 3 years. They're assuming that the only thing that went wrong was there wasn't enough money going into the pharmaceutical industry. Drugs were not approved fast enough, okay? And they didn't have legally binding authority to make people take those things. That's what they're negotiating. They're not even thinking about, well, early treatment and, you know, essential medications and what the heck, you know, really went on. They're not challenging that the testing was ridiculous and the lockdowns and the
people with comorbidities having a harder time with any health situation.
It's confusing because the title of the regulations imply that it's about health, but they're misnamed, and that's how propaganda works. If people said, oh, they're changing the international surveillance regulations, everybody would be like, well, what are they doing? Okay.
What's that?
They're not talking about health. They're talking about a global digital health certificate that would essentially enable some bureaucrat somewhere to demand that, you know, you don't get to live your life unless you do whatever to your body they say. And that's just not going to happen, period. But we all need to share the word so enough people are aware that they're trying to do this and just simply say, no, you're not going to do that. We're out of here.
Well, I can't thank you enough. And I agree with everything. You know, when people tell me, you know, do you take healthcare insurance? No, I don't, because it's not really healthcare. You've got a card that you think you should be able to use like a credit card on anything that you want. And that's not how it works. And our healthcare system, it's managed disease care. That's really what we should call the cards. So
I'll go one step further. I actually view pharmaceutical drugs and these injections as customer acquisition tools. They take healthy people, convince them to come in for some kind of a test. They run the test until they find some number that is out of the norm, even though everybody's different. They convince a generally healthy person, oh, you have a problem. You have to swallow this poison every day. Now you got to come back a few months later because your liver and your kidneys might be failing due to the poison that we convinced you to take to treat your wellness. Okay? Yeah. And then you've got side effects from the first poison. They do another test. You get another poison and another one and another one. If you actually look at the statistics from COVID about quote unquote comorbidities, the better correlate in the data was the number of pharmaceutical prescriptions that people were taking was the best indicator. Because a comorbidity doesn't go untreated in the medical establishment. And so the more medications that people were taking, the more likely they were
Yes.
to have a very serious problem with COVID or die from it. And
Mm-hmm.
comorbidities is a ruse. I mean, it's a real thing, but it's a ruse to hide the fact that those people were being poisoned with many different pharmaceutical prescription drugs. That was the correlate to what caused people to be far more likely to die on a statistical basis. If you're not taking all of those poisons, your liver, your kidney, your immune system are functioning, more optimally, and people got through it like it was a, bad flu, maybe. But if you're swallowing 10 poisons every day, that flu puts you over the edge.
That's right. Well, we got to get this information out. And in doing this series right now, that's one of the things I have even said before I even had a chance to speak with you, is that this particular series is really meant to be shared. We want to get this information out. That is my passion as well, is to give you information so that you can make some decisions for yourself. And you've got to understand when you're dealing, remember, nutrition and chemistry, I'm using those interchangeable. And if you don't understand the backbone of how decisions are made and things that are going to be driving towards us, how do we preserve our health? So, James, thank you so much for joining me today. And again, let's give that information. We've got silenceequalsconsent.com, screwthewho.com, and then there is a couple of other ones. Go ahead and give those again.
Stoptheglobalagenda.com. That's probably the place to start. And if you really want to take action and you're in the United States, exitthewho.com. But I'm actually talking to people all over the world. So 310-619-3055. Give me a call.
Great. Thank you again for joining us. And if you have any questions, remember, you can call the office, 678-501-5172. You can also go on the website, connectmybrain.com, and you can submit a request to schedule a call, and we'll be happy to connect. Everybody, thanks for tuning in, and be blessed.